Tonight, the UN negotiates the rescue of refugees from devastated Dili. John Howard doubles the Australian peacekeeping force. And a candlelit vigil for the victims of the violence.
With Chris Barth, this is 7 Nightly News.
Good evening. First to the East Timor crisis. In the latest developments, the United Nations negotiates the safe passage of refugees from its Dili compound. Latest pictures reveal a city looted and in flames. Militia leaders claim they've ordered a ceasefire, and our cabinet approves 4,500 troops for a peacekeeping force. We begin our coverage in Dili, a city fast becoming a smoking ruin. But there is some heartening news, with the United Nations announcing it's negotiating the safe passage of refugees from its compound. They'll be escorted to a safe haven, while the UN will withdraw most of its staff.
Before now, the extent of Dili's destruction hasn't been seen by outside eyes. 2/3 of the city lie in ruins, the work of the armed militias and their army backers. The streets are empty, but for looters granted free rein. They take what they will from abandoned homes. Here, a military truck is loaded with looted goods. First pictures too of the mass movement of East Timorese. Militiamen wave them on. Many refugees raise their arms in surrender.
There is no such thing as enforced evacuation of people. These people want to go to safer places, and we are helping them.
No help yet from the international community, just talking and looking.
We have decided to go to East Timor.
The UN delegation has failed to persuade Indonesia to agree to a peacekeeping force.
We have so much experience in the UN about this kind of missions and about the failure of that kind of missions.
The UN has already failed to some extent, as 162 of its East Timorese workers will evacuate to Darwin tomorrow. A skeleton staff will stay at the UN headquarters. The 1,000 refugees who stormed the compound early this week are being escorted to a safe haven.
I understand an agreement's been worked out and they will be allowed to go to Dare, which is up in the hills.
Those negotiations come after a militia leader announced on Portuguese radio that truce had been declared in East Timor. The Indonesian military also seems to have changed its tune, escorting an Australian shipment of supplies into the UN compound.
I'm glad that we got it out quickly, and I'm glad we got it up to the compound without any problems.
The killing continues. In the town of Swai, 3 Catholic priests are among an estimated 100 people massacred. Unconfirmed reports say the local director of the Catholic aid agency Caritas has also been killed. The father of resistance leader Shanana Gusmao is also believed to have been murdered. In Jakarta, pro-Timorese demonstrators gathered outside the Australian embassy calling for UN action. The crisis has been deepened by persistent rumours that President B.J. Habibie has been deposed by his armed forces chief, General Wiranto.
The President is fully in charge.
Damien Smith, 7 Nightly News.
A United Nations Hercules returned to Darwin tonight after doing a supply run to its staff in Dili. Mike Amor in Darwin, did the plane encounter any hostilities up there?
No, Chris. In fact, we've just spoken to the pilot, who says that, surprisingly, the Indonesian soldiers were quite helpful. They escorted the trucks carrying the vital cargo to the UN compound and even helped them unpack it. But what is of more concern, though, is the pilot says that Dili is burning. In fact, 90% of the city has already been destroyed, and it appears to be getting worse.
Mike, regarding the planned peacekeeping force, what can you tell us about Australia doubling its commitment?
Well, Australia has now committed 4,500 troops to a peacekeeping force to East Timor, and the argument now is whether that should be armed or unarmed. Behind me in the darkness, you probably can't see it right now, is the HMAS Tobruk. That is now fully loaded and ready to go at any moment. Chris Reason has the details.
Over here. They're heavily armed, fully packed and ready to go. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment lined up on Darwin's wharves file onto the landing ship Tobruk. Around 80 of them, some clutch bundles of maps.
Defence Force spokesmen say they're only here to load their gear, then return to base and await further orders. Their manoeuvres not an act of war, but an act of preparedness. These men will be the first into East Timor. They're the front line of Australia's rapid deployment force. Naval manoeuvres continue too. This top-end fleet is growing.
Hard work?
It is. They're heavy, very heavy.
They're packed with equipment and supplies, just awaiting the green light. At least 9 warships are here now, too many to dock simultaneously. And the Northern Territory itself has become a state of readiness. A tent city being built, ready for any potential rush of refugees.
We'll cater for anything from 1 up to several hundreds, and if necessary on to thousands.
Yet more ships will join this contingent. A British naval destroyer will be here within 24 hours. In Darwin, Chris Reason, 7 Nightly News.
Mike, any reaction from Bishop Carlos Bello about the terrible news with 3 Catholic priests being massacred in Suai?
No reaction at all, Chris. Bishop Bello flew out of Australia today. It's believed he's headed to Portugal, where he'll talk to the government there, asking for more support. He'll then head to the Vatican, where he'll seek advice from the Pope. Bishop Bello hopes to be back in his homeland within a month. And even though there was a pledge of a ceasefire by the militia today, that hope looks even more unlikely today.
Mike Amor in Darwin, thanks for joining us this evening.
A pleasure.
And we've just heard a disturbing report from the United Nations. It's understood refugees who fled to West Timor have now been attacked by militias in their refugee camps. Meanwhile, the international peacekeeping force is still to be formed. Prime Minister Howard's having trouble getting other nations to join. The United States has promised tangible support, but so far, no troops.
We are cooperating with you.
More defiance from Indonesia today. Jakarta's ambassador to Australia denying the extent of the human carnage in East Timor.
Compared to other places, it is not that bad.
That's not the opinion of Asia-Pacific nations attending the APEC summit in Auckland. At the instigation of Australian Foreign Minister Alexander Downer, they met to consider the crisis.
There is no stomach in the international community for a war with Indonesia.
New Zealand pledged a warship to any peacekeeping force. Britain the same.
And we are looking at the provision of something on the scale of a reinforced infantry company.
Late today, John Howard offered to double Australia's peacekeeping contribution to a total of 4,500 troops after Timor's formal separation. And following a conversation with President Clinton this morning, Mr. Howard's still hopeful of a meaningful US contingent.
The situation is not that the United States has ruled out the contribution of troops.
But the Americans' version is different.
The United States is not planning on any insertion of peacekeeping forces.
Mr. Howard flies here to Auckland tomorrow to try and revive momentum for the international peacekeeping force. He'll put his case for US involvement personally to President Clinton. In Auckland, Glenn Milne, 7 Nightly News.
John Howard will need to be mighty convincing. He's not about to make our troops take on Indonesia without the help of other nations. Australia's defence force is far too small compared to Indonesia's.
Force has sparked a wave of anger across the country, Australians recalling our unequivocal support for America, including our controversial backing for Lyndon Johnson's Vietnam campaign.
There is a growing frustration in this country that we should find ourselves so alone in what is basically a human rights issue right on our doorstep.
Even Jimmy Carter supporting Australia's call.
And I would like to see the United States and others through the United Nations impose the most rigid and punishing sanctions on Indonesia as a nation.
And despite pressure on the government to urgently send in a peacekeeping force, the Defence Minister says no Australian troops will land in East Timor without Indonesian permission.
Because if we do, you're inviting all-out war, because that's invading Indonesian property.
The RSL agrees.
The RSL's been branded a warmonger for 80-something years. But I'm going to assure you we don't want to start a war with Indonesia.
Australian forces are smaller but better trained and equipped. Our army of 25,000 is 1/6 the size of Indonesia's, but our air force is bigger. Our Navy has fewer people but has superior fighting power. Defence analysts doubt Australia will do anything to spark a direct conflict.
Australia doesn't want a war with Indonesia over East Timor.
Dean Allen Craig, 7 Nightly News.
Human rights supporters gathered in Sydney early this evening for a candlelit vigil for East Timor. Organised by Amnesty International, it was one of several held around the world today. They called on our government to accept and protect East Timor refugees. The vigil ended with a march to the offices of Garuda Airlines and Prime Minister Howard. Other East Timor supporters gathered for a special church service outside the UN office in Sydney. Prayers were offered for the victims and for the Indonesian military.
Maybe they will find different ways to treat us, not just to kill us, but to love us.
In other news today, an angry protest in Canberra against the Burmese government. 200 demonstrators stormed the Burmese embassy as part of a worldwide protest against the country's military rulers. They overwhelmed 15 security guards and police, burned a Burmese flag, smashed fences and tried to tear down a flagpole. Police reinforcements dragged them away. One officer was injured, one protester arrested. A former policeman who'd just been sentenced in an Adelaide court sparked a 3-hour siege today. He pulled out a knife, held a court stenographer hostage and threatened her life.
Around 9:30 this morning, 32-year-old Wayne Matterford stood in the dock of the district court. Then, just seconds after Judge Michael David told him he'd spend the next 2.5 years behind bars, Matterford exploded. He pulled out a large knife strapped to his left forearm, leapt over the dock and scrambled towards Judge David, but grabbed stenographer Jacinta Gillespie along the way. As sheriff's officers rushed towards him, he threw Mrs. Gillespie to the ground and held a knife at her back, yelling, "Back off, or I'll kill her." Within minutes, the courtroom and then the entire court's building was evacuated. Uniformed and Star Force police soon poured in, together with police dogs, ambulance officers and even firefighters were called in too. Family members and a police negotiator tried to convince him to give up. As the drama continued, a woman who claimed to be a good friend of Matterford's said she had no idea why he took a knife into court.
I've really got no comment at the moment.
Finally, after a 3-hour ordeal, hostage Mrs. Gillespie was freed.
She's very calm, composed and shows no outward signs of having suffered. No, my understanding is she's not injured at all.
An hour later, Matterford gave himself up. Graham Hunter, 7 Nightly News.
Another massive blast in Moscow. Next, the search for survivors in the ruins of an apartment block. And a mammoth effort saves our World Cup ski event. Chinese President Jiang Zemin has been the target of yet another pro-Tibet protest rally. Hundreds gathered outside the venue of a dinner hosted by New South Wales Premier Bob Carr. Their message, free Tibet and democracy for China. Again, police kept the demonstrators well away from the president. Inside, Premier Bob Carr spoke of the friendship between his state and China. In return, President Jiang praised the business, tourism and education ties between his country and New South Wales. Rescue teams are continuing to search through the rubble of a Moscow apartment block destroyed by a massive explosion. At least 14 people were killed and dozens are still missing.
The explosion happened shortly after midnight. The blast tore through the 9-storey building in Guryanov Street in the southeast of the city. More than 70 apartments housing over 200 people were destroyed. The Ministry of Emergency Situations says the cause of the explosion is not yet known, but that initial indications are that it may have been a gas leak. More than 100 firefighters and rescue workers rushed to the scene. Because of the time the explosion happened, most residents were at home, many in bed. The operation to save scores of people trapped in the wreckage has continued through the night. Emergency services fear the death toll will continue to rise. Heavy lifting gear and sniffer dogs have been brought in to help the search. Most of the injured, including several children, have been taken to hospital. Some 40 people were taken to shelter in a nearby cinema. One of those escorted from the scene by rescue workers said she had thought it was an earthquake. Another said it was as if the building had been cut in half with a knife.
International rescue crews have joined the search for survivors of the Athens Earthquake. 2 people were pulled free from the wreckage of this detergent factory in the city's north. But many people didn't make it. 12 children are among the 75 dead, with thousands more injured or missing. Tent cities are being set up to shelter the 16,000 people left homeless. Alain Robert, better known as Spider-Man, has finally met his match. Robert, who's famous for climbing the tallest buildings in the world using just his hands and feet, took on this 110-metre building in Paris. But halfway up, he was overcome by heat and exhaustion. He called for help on his mobile, and the fire brigade sent in a rescue team. Despite his failure, he received a hero's welcome when he reached the ground. Today was a real reason to celebrate. 9 99-year-olds got together for a special celebratory lunch on the 9th of the 9th, 1999. Some had extended families with them, and most were keen to share the recipe for a long, successful life.
Good genes, that's all. Had a wonderful husband. Wonderful. I don't think about how old I am. What's the use?
The formality's over. It was time to cut the cake, sit back and relax, I believe. Now, a quick look at finance news, and the Australian dollar gained ground today. The All Ords finished up 7 points in line with Wall Street. But Telstra lost a little ground. Its shares down 4 cents. BHP gained 9, but the AMP lost 7. Coles fell 11 cents. The Commonwealth Bank rose 7, while News Corp jumped 37 cents. The Aussie dollar is buying just under 65 US cents, 70.7 yen, 40 British pence and 61.25 euro cents. Gold is selling for $256.80 US an ounce. The FT100 is up 5 points in early trade. The Nikkei finished up, and so too has the Hang Seng. A World Cup ski event this weekend at Victoria's Mount Buller will go ahead despite a major meltdown. The alpine community had to move a mountain of snow just to save the freestyle aerials competition.
Buller is fit for the world's best freestyle aerialists, but it has been touch and go.
We've had an unprecedented melt. I think we've lost the best part of, a metre of snow in 10 days, and there's not many people can remember that ever happening.
The mountain community pitched in like never before to get every available drop of snow onto the jump site. Trucks were brought up to gather and deliver snow as organisers raced against time and the climbing mercury.
There was trucks coming past. As I was sitting in a restaurant, I say, there goes, the Mount Buller aerial jump site. It's been great. We're really close to cancelling, but the huge effort from the mountain, we've put a good foot forward, and it's going to be fantastic.
The prevailing attitude is, we've got to do whatever it takes to make this event happen.
12 giant snow guns have been dumping on the course over the last week to bring it up to one of the finest jump sites on the circuit. Added to that, the snow over the last 3 days and more expected, and the mountain's decision to go ahead as late as Sunday night has proven to be the right one.
The mountain's put in a good effort, so now it's my turn.
At Mount Buller, Mark Beretta, 7 Nightly News.
Coming up next, sport and Manly and Norths, another step closer to a merger while Australia's batsmen crumble on the opening day of the first test against Sri Lanka.
Big appeal and out. The second wicket falls in identical fashion to the first.
Australia has had a disastrous opening day in the first cricket test against Sri Lanka in Kandy. The Aussies crumbled after winning the toss. Ricky Ponting and Jason Gillespie saving us from embarrassment. The home side ahead by 119 at stumps.
It was a nightmare start for the Aussies. Michael Slater first to go, a second ball duck.
That's out.
Opening partner Greg Blewett joining him for a duck in almost identical fashion.
Big appeal and out. The second wicket falls in identical fashion.
The horror continued. Justin Langer flirting outside off stump, and then Mark Waugh giving Vars his third. Australia crashing to 4 for 16. Captain Steve Waugh tried to hit the side out of trouble, but he went to 19 before falling victim to Zoysa. Helly and Warren came and went. Australia embarrassingly placed at 6 for 70 before Ricky Ponting and Jason Gillespie joined forces for a century partnership and set a record 8-wicket stand for any country against Sri Lanka in tests. Ponting simply superb.
Oh, good hit by Ponting. That's a very good hit.
When Gillespie fell just before tea for 41, after a 107-run stand, the visitors were 8 for 167. Ponting just 4 short of 100, becoming Muralidharan's 4th scalp.
So what a disappointing end to Ponting.
Sri Lanka attacked from the outset. Jayasuriya racing to 18 before the skipper was trapped in front by McGrath. Arnold fell right on stumps. Sri Lanka finishing at 2 for 69, 119 runs ahead. Bernard Cohen, 7 Nightly News.
Rugby League's third merger looks very much on the cards, and the Northern Bears may be only a month away from reality. Both Manly and Norths are set to ask their members to vote on the proposed merger. The two clubs are demanding the NRL grant them a 6-year licence and an $8 million incentive to get together.
The thing won't take place unless there's that sort of money on the table, and it's just not on.
One certainty, Ben Ikin won't be there. He's been released and will join the Broncos. Australian motorcycle ace Mick Doohan has delayed his comeback and will miss next month's Australian Grand Prix at Phillip Island in Victoria. The 5-time champ broke his right leg, shoulder and left wrist in a race in Spain in May. But he stressed he's not about to retire and will be down under as a spectator for the Aussie GP.
It's an unfortunate shame that I can't be out there, but, you know, it's not a lot of point to just go out there and circulate and do laps. I think there's already a few too many people out there doing that at the moment.
A blow for Australia, with Pat Rafter officially ruled out of this month's Davis Cup tie against Russia. That nagging shoulder injury has seen the pin-up boy of Aussie tennis join Mark Philippoussis on the injured list.
With Rafter's shoulder injury forcing him now to rest until the end of October, Davis Cup captain John Newcombe has more than a few problems. With Philippoussis also missing, reproducing the form against Russia that we saw against the US in Boston won't be an easy task.
What we're hoping is that we can win this semi-final, and Pat, of course, will be 100% fit for the final, which is in early December.
Then from hothead to head honcho. That's the John McEnroe story as the former brat takes over as the 37th US Davis Cup captain. Once a rebel, he's now a rebel with a patriotic cause.
I needed some time away from the game. Time away from things sometimes gives you appreciation for what you don't have.
One player he is keen to have in his lineup is Andre Agassi, today at his best against Nicolas Escudé.
Yes.
He closed the match out in straight. The Frenchman out 6-4 in the third. Agassi now out against Kafelnikov. That match to decide the new #1. Earlier, Serena Williams joined her sister in the semis, defeating Monica Seles.
Finals, her first at a Grand Slam.
Peter Vandy, 7. Nightly News.
Now for a look at our national weather prospects. Cloud is increasing over South Australia and Western New South Wales, while a front extends across the southern Tasman to eastern Victoria, and another frontal band is building southwest of Perth. A weak trough of low pressure is gradually developing between two highs, one in the Western Tasman, the other in the Great Australian Bight. Should be mostly fine in Queensland, apart from a few showers in the south, tops of 29 in Cairns, 24 in Brisbane. A few showers likely along the New South Wales coast, highs of 18 in Sydney, 14 degrees in Canberra. Victoria, partly cloudy with a little rain, 16 in Melbourne, 18 degrees in Albury-Wodonga. Should be cloudy with the chance of a shower in Tassie, 12 degrees in Hobart, 15 in Launceston. It'll be mostly fine in South Australia, 17 in Adelaide, 15 the top in Mount Gambier. Mostly fine throughout Western Australia, but a little rain, 24 degrees in Perth. Fine and sunny in Broome, 32 degrees there. In the top end, Darwin looking much the same, and in the Alice, fine and warm, 27 degrees. And that's all from the Channel 7 newsroom for now. I'm Chris Bath. I'll see you tomorrow night. Good night.